Welcome back. You're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida. And I've been working on setting up a show with an interview of a CEO of a medical marijuana company. And I'm still working on it, so we haven't got that set up for this week yet. But we're working on getting that scheduled. The timing of it is going to be somewhat dependent on both of us. And, you know, So
you decided to go with the munchies instead?
So we went, yes. So what we're doing is we're going to focus today on something, you know, it's kind of similar theme. If you think about lighten up, we're going to lighten up on the topic. You know, we've been getting pretty deep into some heavy stuff a lot lately, and you can, you know, lighten up with your medical marijuana, but you can lighten up the topic with foods. I don't know, some silly fun. But anyway, so what I thought I'd do is talk about healthy snacking, basically. And you know, I talk about the content of the food in the U.S. We're definitely a nation of experimentation on its own people, basically. I mean, we are, the food manufacturers are including many, many, many substances that are not good for us. And, you know, obviously that lends to many disorders along the way because we're not eating the right things. You know, I think Morgan Spurlock really hit it on the nose when he did the Super Size Me movie, where he ate nothing but McDonald's for a month and practically killed himself with that. And, you know, that's about average for U.S. consumption. I mean, the average individual in the U.S. is eating fast food several times a week. Not a good thing. Fast food is not made in such a way that it's really healthy for you, typically. And it certainly can include many components that are actually more than just not healthy, like even carcinogenic or cancer causing, or causing other diseases or inflammation specifically. And inflammatory disorders are kind of the crux of chronic issues in the health of individuals. So as I said, I've been getting pretty deep into a lot of these topics, and I'm already getting a little deep today, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from here. So, you know, with the advent of fast food, we have restaurants like McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, you know, Taco Bell, all these types of things. I think a lot of people think that those are good foods for some reason. Haven't caught on to the fact that the majority of that stuff is pretty bad, is inflammatory for sure. Very inflammatory foods. And again, most chronic conditions are inflammation based. So we have individuals walking around with heart disease, with elevated blood pressure, with kidney issues, with fibromyalgia even, or all these other disorders that are inflammatory in nature. And the food is adding to the problem. So in order to address how we can work around that and still be able to do something fast, so in other words, healthy fast food, in a sense, I thought we would talk about healthy snacking. And there are some restaurants, some of them are becoming chains, that are getting more into the healthy fast food realm because there is a need. One example locally in the Tampa Bay area in Florida is Evo's. Evo's is generally a restaurant that is fairly healthy. Most of their menu is organic or something along those lines, and many of the foods are done differently. For example, what are fried, as in fries, fried potato at a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Wendy's, truly deep fried, nasty trans fat containing foods that are not good. You want to add one to the, or analyze
well,
it?
I just right now want to give something to the kids. Is that okay to be used?
Oh, I see.
So as we're speaking about the topic,
Oh, very interesting.
there's no fructose,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, it has soy lecithin, which is genetically modified. So generally I would stay away from that, but I think
A slice of toast.
a tiny amount right now is probably okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
And this
So-
is how you roll.
Yeah, that's how I roll. So generally speaking, I don't compromise, especially for my kids. But when it comes to, tiny amounts, there is a school of thought that we need to be at least a little exposed to some things. It's kind of the principle of vaccination to build up immunity to them so that our bodies don't over-respond. In other words, to help our bodies be healthy in all circumstances, we've got to make them ready to address all of the issues that human beings are being exposed to, all of the toxins that we're being exposed to. So, generally speaking, though, we want to focus on foods that are not deep fried, preferably not genetically modified, that are not inflammatory in general. We're trying to avoid inflammatory foods. And Evo's has a menu that includes similar things to, say, a McDonald's, but done in a healthy way. So, for example, they have burgers. The burgers are, for example, if they use beef, they use beef that is free range. They use beef that doesn't contain all of the hormones and antibiotics typical of commercial farming and commercial beef market, whatever. So the same idea with other foods that they have on their menu. So you can get turkey that is not full of antibiotics and hormones. You can get chicken that is not full of antibiotics and hormones. And you can get wild caught cold water fish like wild caught salmon. And wild caught fish is the way you want to go because they have the anti-inflammatory oils, the omega-3s particularly, that help to bring down inflammation. Now, one of the reasons that I try desperately to stay away from genetic modification is because genetic modification in tests has shown to be inflammatory, generally speaking. Inflammation is led to by genetic modification. So it's contributing to the problem, if not causing it, if you do a lot of it. So many foods are genetically modified. Nowadays, peanuts are very commonly genetically modified. So if you're buying peanut butter that is not labeled as non-GMO or organic, the chances are the peanuts and the peanut butter are GMO, genetically modified organisms, and they're going to lend to inflammatory issues, typically. So one of my little props here today is something I found in, I guess it was a Publix yesterday. This is a mixed nut bag. And the bag of mixed nuts is, I'm not promoting this particular brand or anything, but the mixed nuts include almonds, pecans, walnuts, and cashews. First of all, it doesn't include any peanuts. Okay, so that avoids that one automatically. So we're skipping the whole peanut issue. And then it has on it, and it is a verified non-GMO project package. So in other words, these nuts are not genetically modified. So we can find things like that, and now more than in the past, this is available. These kinds of options. All you have to do is look for them. They're there. In fact, organic and non-GMO are a very growing combination of trends to address the growing awareness of this as an issue. So these are not genetically modified. It says up here, it's kind of hard to see probably, but up here there's a little label right by my finger that says non-GMO. Non-GMO does not mean organic. However, generally speaking, if something is organic, it will be non-GMO. So they're different. It's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. You know, non-GMO means it's not genetically modified, but that doesn't mean that it was grown without pesticides. You know, it doesn't mean that it was organically farmed with all the right nutrients. It could very well have been farmed with the standard quote unquote modern agricultural science that just has 3 basic nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to feed the plants, which means that the foods that are produced through modern farming do not have a large portion of the nutrients that, when grown organically, would be found in the food. So that's kind of an important point when you're looking for healthy, quick snacks. So this is a healthy, quick snack. It's not genetically modified. Now it's possible there are some pesticides in here, but it's at least not genetically modified. And again, looking at this in terms of what does it do for you in terms of proteins and carbs and so on. So this mixed nut bag here, almonds, pecans, cashews, and walnuts, combined is labeled to have 6 grams of protein, 6 grams of carbohydrates, and 5 grams of protein, per ounce, the ounce being a serving for this. Now, one thing I noticed that kind of has me curious is sometimes we see labeling that includes potassium, and sometimes we don't. And I know for a fact there's potassium in this bag. These nuts have potassium. Yet, in this case, the package is only labeled for the quantity of sodium. The sodium in 1 ounce is 80 milligrams. That's a little on the high end of what I'd like to see. But I know there's potassium to offset that, so I'm not too concerned about that. But in foods that don't contain potassium and that are loaded with sodium, there's a problem inherently in that fact. Another thing that I've mentioned in previous shows is that when they use sodium in food manufacturing or in processing, these are somewhat processed foods, even this package, the sodium that's used, the salts that are used, are not typically iodized. So the whole idea of iodizing your salt, adding iodine to the molecule to help out with thyroid function and other needs that are involved, is kind of omitted when it comes to anything that's been processed. They don't have to use iodized salt. And the majority of food that's out there that's packaged like this is not using iodized salt. So we don't have any way of addressing that with these kinds of foods, the iodine component. Another thing that I want to mention here is that when I look at the ingredients, we see cashews, almonds, walnuts, Brazil nuts. Oh, Brazil nuts, I didn't know about that one. Pecans. But we also have vegetable oil, safflower, sunflower, and or canola oil. And there's some salt and rosemary extract. Now, the safflower and sunflower oil and canola oil are polyunsaturated fats, which means that if this is heated, if this oil is heated above 110 degrees or so, that those molecules are open to bonding with something in their environment and transfiguring, turning to trans fat. So if these are roasted, so there's a good possibility that there is some trans fat in this package. Even though it's not labeled as such, good chance. Another aspect to that is I mentioned canola oil. So one of the things that makes it on the healthier end is that it's non-GMO, not genetically modified as on the label right here. But generally speaking, if you see canola oil, think GMO. Canola oil is typically genetically modified. So if a package is verified as non-GMO, then we have to trust basically that the canola oil that's in here is not GMO. So you can see some of the aspects I'm looking for. You can see that this is not perfect. There are some aspects that might be an issue, but for the most part, it's probably a healthier snack than a lot of what's out there. And it's getting to that point where you have to weigh the pros and cons, and sometimes every choice is going to have something negative to it. So you have to kind of figure out what's the best choice. So healthy snacking is not an easy objective nowadays, but if you start looking for organic and non-GMO, that narrows down the choices, right? And then you can go from there and compare. So another one. This is a Pro Bar that I picked up. Now, let's talk about protein bars and energy bars. Okay, so we have protein bars and we have energy bars. Protein bars, my definition of a protein bar would be that it has a significant amount of protein compared to the amount of carbohydrates, putting fat aside for the moment. So to be a protein bar, it needs to be significantly including protein. There are a lot of these out there. Some of my preferred choices include about 20 grams of protein and 14 grams of carbs. Some of them flip that. Some of them are about 14 grams of protein and 20 grams of carbs. But even within that realm, like 14 to 20, they're in a pretty good range as far as glycemic index and the handling your body does of the glucose metabolism and that kind of thing. So it's not a bad choice even at a 14 to 20 ratio, 14 grams of protein to 20 grams of carbs. But the kinds of carbs do matter. You know, if it's laced with rice syrup or other kinds of syrups or tapioca syrup, whatever, sugars basically, that's not a good carb. But if it's carbs from, say, berries or fruits, that's much better. So if there's that much carbohydrate but it's from fruit sources, it's a better option. Now, it's from fruit juices, it's not as good an option because the fruit juices are higher on the glycemic index, which means that they affect insulin response more. They're a higher kind of concentration of sugars, kind of the way that your body would react to them. It is not as good, not as balanced. So given that kind of understanding, here we have this Pro Bar. So the Pro Bar, one of the first things I'm looking for is it's verified non-GMO. Okay, so it's not genetically modified. Now, it is not organic. It's also certified gluten-free. That's good. That's good. But it doesn't mean just being gluten-free is healthy. That's not all there is to it. Okay? So it's not genetically modified. Oh, in actuality, I just found something here that just caught me off guard. It says certified organic, so it is certified organic. What do you know? So this is a fairly good choice. You can see I'm being pretty picky here because this is non-GMO, certified organic, and gluten-free, and yet I'm saying a fairly good choice. I'm not saying it's a great choice. That's a fairly good choice. The reason I say that is that in terms of energy, yes, it's providing some energy. But in terms of the content of protein, nowhere near what I would call a protein bar. Okay? And I think some would read from the Pro Bar name that focused on protein. No, that's not the case. So in this case, we have 8 grams of protein, pretty significant, right? 8 grams of protein, that's pretty good. We've got 8 grams of protein in this little bar. But when we look at it proportionate to the amount of carbohydrates, it basically sinks this bar. It's not so hot. Because the total number of carbohydrates listed are 51 grams. 51 grams of carbs to 8 grams of protein. So if somebody's trying to lose weight, for example, and wants to eat protein bars, or maybe they're vegan and they want to avoid animal sources, whey protein and this kind of thing, this is an option, but it's not a really good option for providing enough protein. Okay, 8 grams of protein compared to the amount of carbohydrates. Nutritionally, it has a few things, but when we look at the amount of carbohydrates, you can start seeing why it's so high in carbs. The first ingredient, which means the ingredient that is most prevalent within this bar, is brown rice syrup. Brown rice syrup. Very high glycemic index. Okay, then we have ingredients like oats, dates. Dates are better. If they kept the syrup out, that would be great. That would bring down the number of carbs, and it'd be a much more natural and more slowly processed form of carbohydrate. So we have oats, dates, sunflower seeds, which are wonderful, cashew butter from cashews combined with sunflower oil, cashews, raisins, another source for fruit sugars and potassium, flax seeds. I'm not a big proponent of flax, but a little bit mixed in here and there is not a bad thing. Sesame seeds, almonds, crisp brown rice, dried cane syrup. So here we have some more syrup from cane sugar. So again, raising the glycemic index and adding hydrate total. Then we have strawberry puree. So strawberry puree, if it didn't say certified organic, I would be thinking pesticides. Strawberries have the most pesticides of any food that is farmed in the U.S. Let me say that again. The highest quantity of pesticides in the U.S. is found in strawberries. So if you're letting your little ones munch on strawberries, you are having them swallow a fair portion of pesticides. And some of these are nerve agents, these pesticides. Some of them are xenoestrogens. Some of them are carcinogens. So if they're consuming a lot of them, the chances are going up of having any of those disorders. So we want to avoid that. Okay. So this one though is again, ProBar is labeled certified organic. Now it's not labeled USDA organic, so I've got to wonder about that a little bit. But it is labeled certified organic from an international group, let's see, Quality Assurance International. So I'm not familiar enough with that organization to say yay or nay, but it's probably pretty good. All right, and we go on. So there's strawberry puree, there's expeller pressed canola oil, and again, labeled non-GMO. So I'm trusting that canola oil is not genetically modified. Vegetable glycerin, again, some sweetness there. Strawberries themselves, dried pineapple, dried papaya. See, so we have some fruit in there, fruit sugars being contributed. And then dried cane syrup, and then rice syrup. So there's more syrup and syrup. And then apple juice concentrate. So there's a fruit juice example. Oat flour, pumpkin seed, molasses. A little sweet, but better than some of these other sugars. Citric acid, natural strawberry flavors, which I wonder about a little bit. Acai powder, mangosteen powder, purple corn extract. So we have proanthocyanidins in the purple corn, great antioxidants, but it is corn. So if it's not labeled non-GMO, I'm going to assume that that corn is genetically modified. But in this case, it is non-GMO, so I'm going to go with it because I don't think the corn is going to be genetically modified, right? According to what's been labeled. And some other little things in there. But you see how we can look at the details and figure out, well, is this healthy? How healthy is it compared to some other foods? Like if we have a group of, say you're at the grocery store and you're choosing among the choices in front of you, you can look for non-GMO, you can look for organic, and filter starting there, and then start looking even closer at what the list of ingredients are, you know, what's on the list, and go from there. So these are pretty good as a snack, but a little sweet, a little on the sweet side. 51 grams of carbohydrates compared to 8 grams of protein is quite a, quite a wide spread. So much higher content of sugar than protein. Not a protein bar. There are protein bars on the market that are pretty good. I can tell you some of them, like one brand is called Aloha. I think they're fairly decent. I've looked at all of their bars and they're pretty good. Good ratios, somewhere in that 14 to 20 range in terms of the ratio of protein to carbs. Aloha bars, then we have others. There's 122 something, 22, can't remember the full name, but it's got the number 22 in it anyway. And pretty good range of bars from them as well. And they use pea protein as opposed to whey protein. I prefer to go with non-animal proteins generally because they will tend to be less inflammatory. So pea protein is a great way to go, and in some of these protein bars. Now there's a group of bars that I'm a little dubious about. I see them and I've used them myself in the past, but I'm not too happy about them. The Builder's bars, the Cliff bars. Cliff makes Cliff bars that are generally mostly oatmeal, but they have some other components and there's some protein in there and this kind of thing. And they state on the package that they're not sourcing from genetically modified sources. However, they don't say non-GMO, and it's not verified non-GMO. And the majority of what their ingredients list out say they're organic. However, there are a few ingredients that are in there that are not listed as organic. One of them being soy lecithin, and some others. Now, soy lecithin may or may not be an issue. Certainly isolated soy protein or various forms of soy protein can be an issue because typically soy is genetically modified. And then second to that, you're looking at protein. Protein is where the genes are. The genes are part of that structure. The genes are where the genetic modification is happening, right? So prefer to stay away from the isolated soy proteins and these kinds of proteins. And tend toward much more toward pea proteins. Pea proteins, great. There are others. Hemp protein is a great one. Speaking of that future guest talking about medical marijuana, well, hemp is in the same family as marijuana. And hemp protein is widely available. There are others. I mean, nowadays you can get cashew, almond, many types of protein sources are out there in snack foods now. Now, there's another company that I generally like, but I watch very carefully because they are not, let's just say that they're not saying certain things, okay? In other words, okay, so you're looking for non-GMO and organic and this kind of thing, right? And when you're looking at Lara bars are pretty good healthy snack in some ways. Some of them, some specific ones or types, are labeled non-GMO, not genetically modified. You know, and they're gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free. Okay, so the fact that they're soy-free helps that out. And vegan and kosher. Okay, so I look for the choices that say non-GMO and soy-free. These are the things I look for. Non-GMO and soy-free. Now, gluten-free is a bonus. Dairy-free is a bonus to me. But non-GMO and soy-free say more. And the thing about the way this is done with a company like Larabar, and other companies do this same kind of little trick, is they'll label the ones that are non-GMO as non-GMO. But on the ones that have GMO, have genetically modified organisms, they don't say contains GMO. They just leave it off. So the ones that have on their label non-GMO are not GMO. But if they're GMO, they're going to not have anything addressing that issue. And people will look at them and they'll say, oh, gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, that looks healthy. But they're still genetically modified. So there are some choices within the Larabar family that are not genetically modified, according to at least their labeling. And the one I'm holding up here is a blueberry bar. It's called Blueberry Muffin. There's another one that's a lemon that has some cashew in it, this kind of thing, and that's also non-GMO. But a lot of their bars are not labeled non-GMO. A lot of their bars probably are genetically modified. So you need to look for the ones that are labeled saying non-GMO, and then also preferably soy-free. Now, that's regarding the issue about genetic modification and how things are labeled. Another thing to realize is that, again, this is not a protein bar, okay? The Larabar is a good bar. It's healthy, generally speaking, as long as it's not genetically modified and doesn't contain all the soy. But when we look at the proportions, again, we have 4 grams of protein to 26 grams of carbohydrates. So this I would qualify basically as an energy bar, but definitely not a protein bar because the proportions aren't right. It doesn't have a significant amount of protein compared to the level of carbohydrates inside. Another aspect in this case is that the sodium and potassium levels are labeled. So one of the things that makes it kind of a healthy snack, even though it may not be a good protein bar, is still a healthy snack because one, is non-GMO and soy-free, but also when I look at the content of potassium in a bar, it's labeled as 300 milligrams. 300 milligrams of potassium is significant. That's good potassium level compared to especially the level of sodium in the bar, because the level of sodium in the bar is only 5 milligrams. So we have 300 milligrams of potassium and 5 milligrams of sodium. This is important because the majority of the diets of people in the United States contain a lot of sodium. And a lot of the foods that are processed, like these bars, have a lot of sodium. But in this case, we only have 5 milligrams of sodium and 300 milligrams of potassium. So the potassium is important because potassium and sodium need to be balanced. We have pumps going across the membranes of each of our cells. And the balance of sodium to potassium is important in transferring things back and forth into the cells and out of the cells. So if we get too much sodium and not enough potassium, that equilibrium that's created by having the right amounts of each is affected negatively. So anyway, and I love blueberries. I'm a big fan of blueberries. So blueberries have proanthocyanidins. So they are very potent antioxidants. However, you would need a lot of blueberries to get sufficient to really make a big difference in your body's protection mechanisms. All right, so going along with the healthy snacking, we have healthy foods or healthy snack foods, but we also have drinks to consider. So I could have had a V8. Well, okay, so speaking of potassium and sodium, what to look out for with the V8, for one, it's not, V8 juices are not organic. So it's very likely there's a fair amount of pesticides in the V8 juice. Secondly, there is no labeling or no reference to being non-genetically modified. So there's probably some genetic modification of some of what's in there. But thirdly, back to the potassium and sodium. So we have regular V8 juice, which has a very large amount of sodium to a smaller amount of potassium. But if you choose the low sodium V8, you're looking at a juice that has a much higher level of potassium and much lower sodium level. So if I were to choose a V8 and kind of ignore the fact that there's probably pesticides in there, I would go with the low sodium V8. Another thing that's put out, a bunch of juices that are put out, or so-called juices, blends by V8. I think they call them Splash. That group of juices has quite often Splenda in them. So you need to look closely. Splenda or sucralose be in a lot of those. And if they have Splenda, stay away. You don't want to be drinking Splenda. You're getting chlorine directly into your stomach, etc. And the effect of the Splenda is to raise insulin resistance. So a lot of diabetics are buying foods that have Splenda, thinking they're doing the right thing because it's diet and it's an artificial sweetener, so it's not really sugar, and therefore it must be okay, it must be a good choice. But in point of fact, it's a very bad choice. Splenda raises insulin resistance, one of the primary issues with diabetes. Therefore, it is leading people to become even more diabetic, one could say, affecting the metabolism and so on and so on. So foods that have Splenda are adding to the problem. And with juices and drinks that have Splenda, it's an even more direct route than through food, because food is broken down more. There's more work to be done to break it down, and therefore the effect is not as drastic and not as direct. The bioavailability of juices and drinks of various kinds is much higher typically than that of foods. And the same can be said between pills and capsules and liquids. The bioavailability of a pill is typically pretty minimal. So in other words, if you take a pill, you may be likely to get about 20% of what's in the pill. If you take the same thing in the form of a capsule, you might see as much as 30%. Then if you take the same thing in the form of a liquid, you may see 70%, something like that. If you take it in the form of an isotonic, you're getting 95% into your bloodstream in 5 minutes. So there's quite a range of possibilities in terms of the absorption and bioavailability of the foods. So choosing foods is really a way of choosing a natural approach to your body's health. Hippocrates made a statement, obviously eons ago, that let food be your medicine, let medicine be your food. And I think it's been echoed somewhat by Thomas Edison, who spoke of the doctor of the future, not using pills and drugs, but will be using the food of the people to help medical conditions. And I do this a fair amount myself. So, food and nutrients, nutraceuticals are what we use at Path to Wellness. We use nutraceuticals, which are more characterized and derived in pharmaceutical sort of approach, as opposed to the over-the-counter pills and capsules and so on. So the effects are more significant and quicker, typically, than what's coming off a shelf in some store. Okay, so healthy snacking. So to kind of phase this subject on here, when we're snacking, how we snack can matter too. For example, if you're having dessert and your dessert is a piece of pie, well, that piece of pie, if eaten by itself, away from food, will spike your insulin more than if you eat it with a meal or immediately following a meal. So the timing can be important. The specific choices can be important. Eating the pie or not, or when you eat the pie. Either of those can affect the outcome. And when we eat foods, we want to eat in a balanced way so that, one, our blood sugar regulation is balanced. Two, we want to make sure we're getting all the food groups. And I'm talking about the macros, like macronutrients. So we're talking protein, fat, and carbs. Carbs, we want to focus on not starchy carbs. Not that snack shouldn't be bread or a cracker so much, but more of something more balanced. With protein, fat, and carbs, and good fats in that, and good carbohydrates. So vegetable carbohydrates or fruit carbohydrates can be very important there, as opposed to starchy carbs, grains, pasta, rice, corn, potato, these kinds of things. Those are all in the realm that we want to minimize or avoid. So healthy snacking entails some thinking, some focus, some attention to detail, really reading labels and making choices and really understanding what you're reading and analyzing it for sugar content and these kinds of things. What level of nutrients, what proportion is protein to carbs, all of these things. Fat is another issue as well. So we want fat. We do want to consume fat. Consuming fat is healthy. Consuming fat does not make you fat. And that's an old wives' tale that's still sticking around a little bit. I remember in the 70s, everybody was focused on, low fat. And what happened was a lot of the foods were created to be lower in fat, but they didn't taste as good, so the manufacturers threw in more sugar. So the carbohydrates went up, the fats went down, and people got sicker. Which for most at that time would have been counterintuitive. But it turns out, hey, fat is actually good for us. We need fat. What kind of fats do we need? Well, we need to focus on getting more omega-3 and omega-9 fats, and much, much less than is average of the unsaturated fats, these kinds of things. So just gotta pay attention to your choices, really filter through, look at all of the information, and come up with the best options. So that is, hopefully that's useful. I might have just given you some tools to use to understand how to look at your food, to really filter for things like genetic modification, sugar content, protein content, fat content, and so on, and the kinds of fats. So if you're going to snack healthy. Make good choices, read the labels. All right, so you've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. If you'd like to check out our website at A Path to Wellness, the name of my practice as well, you can take a look at it at www.aptw.net, short for A Path to Wellness, aptw.net. Or you can give us a call at the office at 727-329-9637. And we'll talk to you next time.